Good afternoon, all, and welcome to this Heritage program. My name is Paul J. Larkin, Jr. I am a fellow in the Meese Center, and I have the distinct privilege of being your host for today. Before I say anything else, I want to thank you for tuning into today's program. You have many ways that you can spend your time, and I appreciate, and Heritage appreciates, your willingness to spend some of that time with us today. Doing so gives you the opportunity to learn about an important but underappreciated subject, the problem of driving under the influence of drugs. Safely driving a motor vehicle is a complex activity. Most of us take it for granted because we've been doing it since 16. But in fact, it demands alertness, divided yet wide-ranging attention, sustained concentration, and the ability to process quickly visual, auditory, and kinesthetic information. Science teaches us that operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol impairs our ability to drive safely. It demonstrably inhibits our ability to track, to pay attention, to detect signals, to perceive risks, to react quickly, and to concentrate, as well as the ability to engage in hand-eye coordination. Prompted by the advocacy of organizations such as Mothers Against Drug Driving, society no longer deems alcohol-impaired driving merely a peccadillo. As a result, we have successfully lowered the carnage that alcohol-impaired driving had caused. Unfortunately, what many people do not realize is that also, according to contemporary science, drugs other than alcohol can have the same impairing effect and make driving equally hazardous. The reason is that some drugs, even ones that are lawful to use, even ones that can be purchased by a prescription or over the counter, can impair the same skills needed to drive safely that alcohol deteriorates. Moreover, this problem is not an isolated phenomenon. Drug-impaired driving is far more prevalent than most people realize. Now, don't take my word for it. Different presidential administrations have found that drug-impaired driving is a major problem. For example, a few years ago, the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration found that in 2017, 12.6 million people aged 16 or older drove under the influence of a psychoactive substance such as heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, or cannabis. Those drivers put their passengers, the occupants of other vehicles, pedestrians, and themselves at the same risk of death or grievous bodily injury that alcohol-impaired drivers pose. In fact, in 2010, the Obama administration concluded that drug-impaired driving, quote, demands a response on a level equivalent to the highly successful effort to prevent drug driving. The person who reached that conclusion was Gil Kerlikowski, one of today's speakers. What has happened is that our response to drug-impaired driving has lagged behind developments in the facts and the law. The opioid epidemic has led to an increase in the number of drivers impaired by drugs like heroin or who are jonesing for a fix. Polydrug use, that is the use of multiple psychoactive substances, including alcohol, has increased the number of people who drive when they should not. And the decision by numerous states to legalize cannabis for medical or recreational use has led to an increase in fatalities in states like Colorado, which legalized recreational marijuana nearly a decade ago. To save innocent lives, public policy regarding drug-impaired driving must catch up quickly. We hope to help that project along by allowing you to hear from 4 experts on the problems that drug use causes. With me today are 4 former directors of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and they are welcome now to join me on screen. The position they once held is colloquially referred to as that of a drug czar, but there is nothing colloquial or unimportant about the job they held. Allow me to introduce each one in the order they will speak, from the earliest to the most recent administrations. First, we have Dr. Robert DuPont. He served as the ONDCP director in the Nixon and Ford administrations. Dr. DuPont is currently president of the Institute for Behavior and Health, a nonprofit research organization dedicated to reducing the use of illegal drugs and improving prevention and treatment. He graduated from Harvard Medical School and completed his psychiatric training at Harvard and the National Institutes of Health. He now is on the faculty of Georgetown Medical Center. Following him is former U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey. He was the ONDCP director in the Clinton administration. Barry is a very highly decorated war veteran. He was twice awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, twice awarded the Silver Star, and 3 times awarded the Purple Heart. He is currently president of his own consulting firm, B.R. McCaffrey Associates, LLC, and is a national security analyst for NBC News. He graduated from West Point. He later received a master's degree from American University, and he attended Harvard University's National Security Program and its Business School Executive Education Program. Up third is the Honorable Gil Kerlikowski. He served as drug czar in the Obama administration. Gil is a non-resident fellow at the Baker Institute Mexico Center, specializing in border issues. During his time in the Obama administration, Gil authored the 2010 President's National Drug Control Strategy, in which he identified drug-impaired driving as being as major a problem as alcohol-impaired driving. He has had a distinguished 40-year career as a law enforcement officer and executive, including a stint as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He holds a BA and an MA from the University of South Florida. Batting cleanup is the Honorable James Carroll, Jr. He served as drug czar in the Trump administration. James had previously served in a variety of roles in the Trump administration, including Deputy Chief of Staff to the President, and previously he had served in several different capacities in the George W. Bush administration, including Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Treasury. James holds a BA from the University of Virginia and a JD from George Mason Law School. As you can see, we have a bipartisan panel. Why? Because the issue at hand is important to everyone. We all are, or should be, interested in reducing the carnage on our roadways caused by the people who drive while impaired by drugs, whether that drug is alcohol, an illicit drug, or a pharmaceutical that can be received under a prescription. What type of drug impairs a driver matters not at all to a crash victim, particularly one killed in a crash. Today's program will proceed as follows. Each panelist will make opening remarks in the order I mentioned. Next will come a moderated discussion involving all 4 panelists. We will conclude with audience questions. If you are watching and have a question, please submit it in the question box found in your toolbar on the right-hand side. We hope that you will find today's program substantive and constructive. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. DuPont. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul, for leading this important Heritage Foundation event. The Institute for Behavior and Health, of which I am president, is proud to be a co-sponsor with you and with Heritage in this event. I am proud to be making this presentation with 3 fellow former drug czars, each of whom I greatly admire. Not included in my official bio is my claim that I am likely to be the only person who has worked with every one of the 17 leaders who have held the White House Drug Office since it was established by executive order on June 17, 1971. No other national priority has held an office in the White House over those tumultuous 5 decades. This reflects the importance of the modern drug epidemic that began in the late 1960s and continues to evolve. This epidemic is destined to extend far into the future. The congressional legislation that formally established the first White House Drug Office, Public Law 92-255, was passed March 21, 1972, with unanimous support from both parties. Bipartisanship, as you have emphasized already, Paul, has been central to the US drug policy over all of those years. Bipartisanship is, of course, reflected also in our panel today. 2 of us former drug czars served under Republican presidents and 2 under Democratic presidents. The establishment of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP, was a major milestone. That legislation was led in the Senate by Joseph Biden, who came to the Senate in 1973, the same year that I became the second White House drug czar. I was also the first director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA. In that role, I oversaw the publication of a research monograph on drugs and driving we published in 1977. I would like to call your attention to the briefing document of this meeting entitled Drug Impaired Driving. It lays out the key facts about drug driving. All of us will be referring to that and to the IBH website, www.stopdrugdriving.org, which has become a national resource on this topic. Policies to address driving under the influence of drugs, DUID, build on the nation's 100-plus-year-old effort to reduce driving under the influence of alcohol. This hard work to address drunk driving is a major public health and public safety triumph. In summary, efforts to reduce drug DUID do not compete with efforts to reduce alcohol impaired driving. Instead, they support, reinforce, and extend the success made against alcohol impaired driving. And as you have mentioned, Paul, in the beginning, polysubstance use is growing. It is a new challenge. It changes the ballpark. Many drivers have multiple impairing drugs on board. Just as impaired driving isn't just about alcohol, drug driving isn't just about cannabis, though that is the most widely used impairing drug other than alcohol. Drug driving includes both illegal and legal drugs, including impairing prescription drugs. There are many good new ideas that I want to put on the table for our discussion today. My top 6 priorities are these. Number 1, public education about the dangers of drug driving. Without heightened awareness by drivers, little progress can be made. The education needs to come from the media, legislation, and government practices. Don't drug and drive should be as widely known and endorsed as don't drink and drive. Together, we can build our century of experience with alcohol impaired driving to confront this new and rapidly growing polydrug reality in impaired driving. Number 2, every driver arrested for impaired driving and every seriously injured or fatally injured driver should be tested for the most commonly used drugs in addition to alcohol. This will require both law enforcement training and adequate funding of laboratories. Number 3, oral fluid testing technology must be widely used to identify drugs in all drivers arrested for impaired driving. Roadside oral fluid testing for drugs is as easy as roadside testing for alcohol. And like tests for alcohol, preliminary positive findings can be confirmed in the laboratory. It is essential to note that before a police officer pulls over a driver, the officer must have reasonable suspicion of a driving infraction, and there must also be probable cause before testing for alcohol or other drugs. These are not random testing, it's testing after a driver has been pulled over for impaired driving. Number 4, we must put to rest the common belief that we need to wait for a 0.08 BAC equivalent for cannabis and other drugs. This is not scientifically possible because unlike alcohol, there is no measurable stable relationship between blood and other tissue levels of impairment. That's a very important point, that we don't need more research to solve this problem. You cannot solve the problem by having a BAC equivalent for other drugs. Cannabis is not the outlier. Alcohol is the outlier in that distinction. Number 5, we must help individuals who arrested for DUIA and DUID access the resources they need to address their problematic alcohol and drug use. The road from active addiction to long-term stable recovery commonly begins with a painful crisis resulting from problematic substance use. An impaired driving arrest and a subsequent legal consequences is a major crisis that changes many lives for the better when linked to appropriate services, including substance abuse treatment and recovery support. Sixth and finally, I urge ONDCP and the Biden administration to make reducing DUID a high priority. A first step is a report from ONDCP reviewing what is known about DUID and making recommendations for how to improve our efforts, including learning from other nations. Both the House and the Senate should hold hearings this year on DUID to develop national bipartisan strategic plan to reduce the serious threat to public safety and public health. Thank you, and back to you, Paul.
Bob, thank you very much. We'll now go next to former General Barry McCaffrey. Barry, it's yours.
Well, thanks very much to Heritage for co-sponsoring this and bringing us all together. And Paul, for your organizational ability to make the webinar happen. And Bob DuPont, who's been a friend for, God, I don't know, 30 or 40 years now. One of my original tutors, mentors, ongoing support and understanding the drug issue since my period of 96 to 2001, acting as the White House Drug Policy Director. And I do associate myself with Bob's opening remarks. I think they're entirely on the mark. And also Gil Kerlikowski and Jim Carroll. It's interesting, this issue, there's been such intense partisanship in Washington, something that I barely understand from my first 40 years in life. And yet it hadn't affected the relationship between those of us who were charged with this responsibility. And I had great respect for both Gil and his background and Jim also for what they managed to achieve in a very tough policy arena. Look, some sort of brief opening comments, one of which is obviously we're now facing twin pandemics. On the one hand, we've got the highest loss of life of drug deaths from overdose, 82,000 people in the country's history. And on the other hand, we've got 500,000 and probably going to 700,000 by this summer deaths from COVID. It's been an utter nightmare, and it's shut down a good bit of the economy. It's closed the court system. The drug treatment court systems in particular have collapsed. They're struggling to reopen. Our treatment programs are in disarray. It's been an utter flipping nightmare. We're coming out of it. One can see a light at the end of the tunnel by this summer, but it's been very tough to get a national conversation on any issue other than dealing with the COVID challenge we're facing. Let me throw out some brief ideas. And again, I sort of defer to Gil's expertise, particularly in law enforcement, and Bob in the science of this issue. But first of all, the whole DUID has been an underrated issue. It's not front of mind. The drug legalizers have tried to prevent us from even collecting data on what happens when drug impaired driving becomes widespread. But I'll throw out a number, $132 billion, a massive problem, 10 to 11,000 dead, maybe 28% of all traffic accidents, probably 57% of all fatalities have a driver impaired by either alcohol or drugs or both. And as Bob mentioned, it's polydrug abuse. It's a huge problem. It's worthy of policy analysis. Secondly, we got to understand when it comes to deterrence, law enforcement or others, the chance of being caught are extremely low. Every day, 300,000 people, Americans, drive impaired. 2,800 get arrested. You're probably not going to get stopped. You're probably going to get away with it. You're probably not going to kill somebody. Third observation, there's been a dramatic increase in drug impaired driving. I don't think we know the half of it. When a police officer pulls you over, if you test positive for alcohol, probably the investigation stops and would not then discover that you're also using opioids or pot or whatever. So I think it's probably dramatically undercounted. As Bob mentioned, there's no reliable test. And therefore, I don't think we understand the dimensions of the problem. Fourth problem, normally I'm dealing, the issues I deal with affect substance abuse disorder, the chronically addicted, the lack of impulse control, a life in total chaos. And when it comes to impaired driving, that is not necessarily what we're dealing with. Pot users, 20.9% are daily users, alcohol, 6.5%. So if we get somebody on impaired driving, it's not necessarily the case that we can use the existing drug treatment programs to correct their behavior. Fifth observation, this is an unusual one. The consequences of driving under the influence of either alcohol or drugs are serious, but not consequential. Unlike Sweden and some other societies, you don't automatically impound the person's car, even if they're the non-owner. Except for the law enforcement or the military, the consequences just are not catastrophic, so they're not very deterrent. Another observation, Bob mentioned it, is basically it's polydrug abuse we're dealing with. And that's not just in driving impaired, but also in the treatment community. Seventh issue, pot is a key issue. It's a political hot potato. It's a hot stove. Politicians run for their life. They don't want us to collect data on the extent of the problem. Pot is now widely available, is largely destigmatized. Pot is amusing. Alcohol abuse is foolish. We're in an odd situation where something that is a tremendously harmful effects of pot are not acknowledged in the public debate. Eighth observation, a small subset of offenders are repeat offenders. It's just unbelievable. Once a month here in Seattle, somebody gets busted and it's been 9 drunk driving or drug impaired driving offenses. And they finally kill somebody. So our inability to get the chronic offender off the roads is something early on that has to be addressed. Ninth observation, there's really no political will to deter first offenders. We all know that I think we've learned over time that it's not the severity of punishment that deters people, it's the likelihood of punishment. And so, I think that particularly the notion of somebody's not a chronic addict or a chronic drunk, there's just no deterrence measures. 10th observation, law enforcement in this country is now overwhelmed, stigmatized, under-resourced, and unwilling to confront misdemeanor offenses in many cases. One of the more effective law enforcement tools, Gil can talk to this, are mobile, weekend, nighttime roadblocks that test randomly. It creates an atmosphere where designated drivers, that sort of thing, now appear. And law enforcement's not going to take that on. They get a bunch of guff. They're under-resourced. It's not there as a tool. 11th, and I think this is a tough one, there's no political will really to collect fluids as evidence. There's an easily administered breathalyzer test, but I think the political barriers to collecting fluids at a roadside arrest are remote. And then finally, this is a difficult one to deal with. This isn't a federal issue. This is a state, municipal, and county issue. That's where the legislation is involved. Feds can frequently do targeted funding, but we need state law, state resources, and state political will to take on the issue. Now, look, I spent a couple of years in military hospital during the Vietnam era. I was on a ward of young officers, primarily, who were mangled in combat. Our morale was incredibly high, it was astonishing. We loved the medical team taking care of us. We thought our lives were going to get progressively better and we'd get back to our families and to work in some form. And every weekend, someone else would show up on the ward mangled in a drunk driving issue. I remember a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, his rib cage smashed. He had killed somebody. He later died on our ward. A gravitational drainage for the poor man. It was just an unbelievable end. And it just underscored to us the senseless slaughter on the nation's highways, not just of the chronic drunk or drug impaired driver, but the people they hit. It's a conversation the country needs to have. What are we going to do about this based on science and common sense? I look forward to ideas coming out of this group today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Gil, you're up at the plate now.
Good. Well, it's an honor to be with my colleagues, and it's very tough to follow both Bob and Barry on this. I appreciate the support of Heritage and the Institute as we bring this issue back more into the light, especially as we see, as you mentioned, light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, because the issues of overdose and the issues of DUID are still really significant, not only to people's health, but also to our economy. So during my tenure, which was 2009 to 14, I had the opportunity to meet with every former director of ONDCP. And it was great because all of those meetings were in person. Frankly, I can hardly wait until we get back to some in-person meetings. I benefited a lot from meeting with them. I gained firsthand knowledge about the problems that my predecessors had, as well as the attention and the focus that they all brought to the problem of drugs. It was both domestically and internationally. And at that time, the discussion around drugged driving or driving under the influence of drugs, it really wasn't a focus. Both my predecessor, John Walters, and my immediate predecessor, General McCaffrey, had started the discussion. And generally, it was as a result of the increase in the legality and use of what was called medical marijuana. When I first assumed the position of ONDCP director, there wasn't significant public awareness of or attention to the crisis of opioids outside of subject matter experts. It just really wasn't publicized. We now know that with the exception of COVID-19 pandemic, opioid addiction is the second greatest health crisis. It's taking lives, costing millions of dollars. We also faced the legalization of recreational marijuana, very different from medical marijuana, in 2 states through referendums, Colorado and Washington. And together, both prescription drugs and marijuana have given rise to the increased danger on our roads by drivers under the influence. Well, my remarks are focused more on the use of marijuana by drivers, although other drugs and the combination of alcohol and drugs certainly deserve recognition and attention. As others have or will point out, the detection of marijuana by drivers involved in fatal traffic accidents has really increased. The problems are threefold, in my opinion. First, there's a resounding lack of readily available and cost-effective technology to detect marijuana prevalence in a driver. We know that without standardized testing equipment that has thoroughly been proven in both science and the courts, convictions for related driving offenses are hard to obtain. One of the most lucrative areas of criminal law defense is in DUI cases. And even experienced and well-trained officers using breath testing equipment have seen alcohol cases dismissed or reduced under intense defense scrutiny. Well, second, getting the public's attention to DUID violations has proven difficult. We have seen advocacy for marijuana legalization continue to increase in public polling without concomitant discussion about the dangers of driving under the influence. Much to their credit, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other advocacy groups have brought significant public attention to alcohol-impaired driving. And these organizations should take the same aggressive posture to DUID. Community organizations, advertising, victim panels have all made alcohol-impaired driving a subject of community concern. And I held discussions with some of these groups, but I found them to be resistant to including drugged driving as part of their agenda. There were several reasons for this, but I thought as a nation we were missing an opportunity to label DUID with the same negative image that DUI had obtained. In addition, changes in laws have made the conviction of operating a motor vehicle above a certain blood alcohol limit easier to obtain. That is why per se laws involving marijuana are needed in each state. And third, the issue goes really far beyond law enforcement. We know that over several years, drivers' training classes at American high schools have been eliminated or reduced, or they've been outsourced to the private for-pay sector. These classes provide an excellent opportunity to educate new drivers about the dangers of marijuana use in operating a motor vehicle. Other partners besides schools need to be engaged. I could not have a better partner in our effort than Secretary Ray LaHood at the Department of Transportation. He was focused, and rightly so, on distracted driving, the use of cell phones and texting while driving, but also about cockpit engineering in vehicles whose screens and software distracted a driver's attention. When I met with him and his staff, he took DUID on with energy. And both the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Agency became great partners. NHTSA pushed the effort for better data through roadside surveys. Well, since being away from ONDCP and law enforcement, I haven't focused on the issues of DUID. Perhaps that is also indicative that as a country and a government, both at the state and local level and at the national level, we have not put the same time, energy, and effort into reducing a problem that really demands public awareness. The time for action is now.
Gil, thank you very much. James, you're batting cleanup.
Boy, this is tough. All the smart people went first and said all the great ideas. First, I really would like to thank Heritage and especially you, Paul, for hosting this important event. And I really am honored to be with Bob, Barry, and Gil. It's been a real blessing to have them as predecessors. They're really the ones responsible for making certain that we as a country are focused on stopping the flow of drugs, teaching prevention, and really treating addiction as the disease that we know it is. I'm also blessed to call them my friends. They were always there when I wanted advice, and they started the example that I was able to follow, that this is not a bipartisan issue, this is a nonpartisan issue. And so that's one thing that we can agree on. I think the other is that we can agree that the staff of ONDCP are just a brilliant and passionate group, and I think we were all really lucky to work with them. Really, I do want to sort of focus on the conversation about marijuana, since that's so much in the national debate right now. And teens especially, I think, are receiving mixed messages on the role of marijuana in our society. And as states legalize this as medicinal or recreational, people have the perception that it's just that it's a recreation, that it's a fun activity, or that it's just a medicine. And they think that it's natural. They think that it's eco-friendly. And what they don't realize is that there are real use risk associated with its use. To go slightly off topic, one thing that I did want to mention is the black market. And what's never really discussed is the use of banned pesticides and herbicides on the vast amounts of illegally grown marijuana, which is a real issue. I snapped a few pictures, which I think Heritage is going to flash up now. And the picture on the left is, or they're both taken from an illegal grow site in California. And you can see on the left These are banned herbicides and pesticides that were found discarded there at the grow site. You can see that they're in Spanish. These grow sites, these are not by hippies out in California. These are Mexican cartels coming across the border with these banned herbicides and pesticides that are strong enough. They found dead bears around some of the grow sites there. And God knows, by the time it actually reaches the end user. On the right side, you can see a couple of the marijuana plants, and that straight black line at the base of the plant is legally diverted water resources from a beautiful stream in the California forest to water the marijuana plants, and therefore the vegetation around it is being poisoned, and it's also being cut off from the natural resources. And that's something that really is not discussed and may be worthy of a future topic. But to get back to today, I think that's it for the slides. The other issue that we really need to talk about is this, about the impaired driving and the risk. There's so much confusion about this topic, and it's leading to risky behavior. Mentioned it a bit by one of the predecessors here, that right now there really is a societal taboo on the use of alcohol and drinking. And that really doesn't exist for drugs. Right now, pretty much everyone understands their alcohol limit, and they know, hopefully, to cut themselves off when they get there. And they also know to cut others off. And this is true among teens and millennials, that they would never dream of letting a friend get behind the wheel of a car if they were intoxicated on alcohol. Most people would call an Uber or drive their friend home, but there's not the same societal taboo on consuming drugs and getting behind the wheel. So you don't know your limit, and that's what's also scary, is you don't even know what you're consuming. So whether you're smoking, vaping, or consuming marijuana, there's usually no awareness of what's in there, including the THC content. And this is especially true for the black market, which we know is flourishing. There's really a very small black market on alcohol right now, but it's flourishing across the country for illegal, illicit marijuana. There's also, of course, on alcohol, if you look at your can of beer or you look at a bottle of booze in your closet, you'll see that there's a warning label that talks about the dangers of consuming alcohol and driving or operating heavy machinery. That doesn't exist for the illicitly purchased marijuana, and why not? These are the things that we need to discuss as a country to making sure that there is awareness. And I'm really honored. I'm partnering with SAD, the Students Against Destructive Decisions, to help spread the gospel of prevention, to talk about the very real issues of drugged driving. And SAD and I are now partnering with the Colorado Department of Transportation to build a peer-to-peer program and awareness campaign on this topic. And I really think that is where we're going to find the results to be the most promising. We know peer-to-peer recovery for other drugs works extremely well. And I think the peer-to-peer awareness of the dangers of impaired driving will work well as well. The program launches in April, and I'm excited to see the results and see how we can fine-tune this and bring it across the country. But what else needs to be done? There needs to be more research. We've talked about that already, and we need to understand the extent of the problem. Research done already by Liberty Mutual and SAD found that 1/3 of all teens, exactly 33%, perceive that it's legal to drive under the influence of marijuana in states where it's been legalized. That's really scary. They think it's legal. 27% of adults believe it to be legal as well. And the other percentage that came out of this study is that 93% of parents found driving under the influence of alcohol to be dangerous, but only 75% believed it to be dangerous to drive under the influence of marijuana. So clearly there's much more work to be done. I'm proud to partner with SAD, and I'm really proud to partner with Heritage and my predecessors to make sure that we're addressing this as a real national issue. Paul, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you all. Let me first, before I ask any questions, and I just have a few, to find out if Bob, Barry, or Gil have anything they would like to add in light of what they've heard. Okay, then let me ask you this. There are a very small number of people in Washington, D.C. who can have a major effect on this issue. President Joe Biden is one. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is another. If either or both called you up on a phone and said, tell me 3 things that I can do this year, right now, what would the 3 things be?
I'll start off, if that's okay. If President Biden can use certainly the bully pulpit of the White House to bring attention to this. We've seen presidents bring attention to the opioid issue. Under General McCaffrey, we saw presidents bring attention to the cocaine issues and the distribution. Well, here is a particular issue that the president could do. And I think the delegation or the finger pointing toward the Department of Transportation would be a second important point. Remember, too, that President Biden has granddaughters. He can really, I think, relate to this issue. Those are the 2 things I'd see, and I'm going to let my colleagues expand in other areas. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited about oral fluids testing. That's a game changer in terms of DUID because it lets the testing go right to the roadside, just the way we do with alcohol. When we had urine testing, as what we're doing, or blood testing, you've got a big barrier to get the test. To get a saliva sample is very easy for police officers to do at a time of arrest. And so I'm very excited about the recent demonstration of how this can be integrated within routine traffic stops. But the concept is that every driver who is arrested for impaired driving and every fatally injured driver and seriously injured driver needs to be tested for drugs. And several of us have talked about the fact that we need more data. One of the things that's happened is when you get to a BAC 0.08, the testing stops. We need to test all those people for the drugs. And when that's done systematically, we'll have a lot better understanding of things, and we'll understand just how widespread the problem is of polydrug use and how where we stand. But the oral fluids testing, I think, is really a game changer. It also gets away from the problem with marijuana that people will have a positive metabolite present for a long time after they use. That doesn't happen with oral fluids, which just tests for THC. So you take away a lot of the controversy by moving to the oral fluids testing.
I guess I would add, and this is something that Barry touched on, is right now what we're seeing is such a dramatic increase in fatal overdoses. We're also seeing a similar rise in suicides. So as soon as it's safe to do so, to open up the economy, to make sure that people can get the treatment that they need, that the kids are able to get the prevention messaging that they need so they don't go down this path. And so as soon as possible, to be able to lift the morale of folks so that people aren't reverting back, to their addiction, and making sure that if there's fewer people using, there'll be fewer people driving under the influence. The other thing that I would really like to see is a national awareness of some of the great work being done by law enforcement these days. And what we know is that law enforcement were the first ones to really push for diversion courts to make sure that people are not going to jail for their addiction. And they're the ones, saying that we need to get those courts back open. And there's also so many groups that are out there. And I think of PARI, the Police Assisted Addiction and Recovery Initiative up in New England. And there are several others like that, that if they encounter someone out on the street, not behind the wheel of a car or engaging in other criminal behavior, but if they encounter someone under the influence, they're taking them to get help. They're taking them to get treatment. And that's really the vast majority of police these days. They truly want to serve their community. And by doing that, they'll also be able to not have those people behind the wheel, because they'll be headed to what is hopefully a lifetime of recovery.
Let me add a thought. And by the way, that Department of Transportation thing that Gil mentioned is a huge deal. The number that sticks in my mind is there's 9 million truckers engaged in interstate commerce that are subject to mandatory drug testing when they have a giant accident, among other things. And it's had, although we still have huge problems in the interstate commerce, but as a general statement, it's not a nightmare as it is perhaps in Mexico and other places. So transportation, the other departments of government beyond HHS and Justice do have a role to play. And the second thought, I know President Biden fairly well, admire him enormously, a decent, civil, experienced, thoughtful man. The people he's bringing into government are almost across the board experts who are people of character. So we've got a good team showing up, but we're still in an era of intense, mindless partisanship. And so I don't expect President Biden to call me and ask about taking on anything that has a whiff of opposition to pot consumption. It's a political red herring. They don't want to get near it. The Obama administration didn't, in my view, face up to it either. And so it's going to be a tough issue. And as Bob correctly says, if you get an oral drug testing roadside check that scientifically and legally works, it'd be a huge game changer. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm a little bit skeptical and pessimistic about our ability to address what in general is pot impaired driving on the nation's highways that are slaughtering thousands of people a year.
Well, that is very interesting. That brings up my next question. After I ask this, I'm going to turn to some audience questions. But we have now perhaps 50 years of experience with efforts to address the alcohol impaired driving problem. What can we learn from the way those people who were supporting that movement addressed this problem? Because they faced opposition as well. Who are the people that are likely to oppose any effort to deal with drug impaired driving? And what can we learn from the way MAD and others addressed the alcohol impaired driving to help deal with this side of the problem? And that is like the old GE College Bowl. It's a toss up for anybody and everybody.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is it's really a 100-year effort, not a 50-year effort to deal with alcohol. And you look at what troubles there were along the way with that. I mean, that's a cautionary tale about how hard this is. I think it's also very striking to me that we need to get the people who are promoting drug use in various ways, including the sellers, to own up to the fact that it is a serious problem in terms of driving the way the alcohol industry has been kicking and screaming, but have done a good job, I think, basically, in this area. It's in their interest to do that and to come together and say, we're talking about impaired driving and we want to work together on this. So I think there is a real hope here to build on what's happened with alcohol in the drugs, but it's an uphill climb, and the events that have happened with alcohol have all to do with getting the media involved in it and getting the public engaged, and I think that's what's going to have to happen here. And let's Gil Kerlikowski used the term oxygen, talking to me about DUI. You know, where's the oxygen? I think the oxygen comes from the deaths and the stories of the people whose lives have been ended or ruined by drug drivers, and I think that's going to happen again.
Okay, well, let me turn then to some questions from.
Hey, Paul, may I add one other thing? One of the bizarre aspects of being a drug policy director is I learned about money. I never paid much attention to money in the armed forces. They gave me some, but in the drug policy, $19 billion, if I remember, 9 different appropriations bills were things that I monitored and tried to help department secretaries rationalize. And I've soon learned that, you know, some General Powell used to tell us in the Pentagon, smart people in Washington don't argue about policy or white papers or strategy. They argue about dollars. And on the drug issue, it's just astonishing. You can't address the drug issue without addressing mental health. There are two sides, as I've learned from Bob DuPont, there are two sides of the same coin. And yet the warring factions, I was seen as the plenipotentiary of the drug side in a war against mental health. And you see the same thing when it comes to something as straightforward about thousands of people being killed on the nation's highways. I once had a little tiff with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, one of the most remarkable, successful organizations in behavioral health in the last 100 years. They wanted my money for alcohol, but ONDCP's enabling legislation says we're not supposed to deal with alcohol abuse. It carve out. Most powerful people in the country aren't sheriffs or police chiefs. They're the regional beer distributors who know that people drinking beer are college kids and the armed forces, underage, and they're stiffing it to them. So we've got a budgetary problem also that I think ONDCP is positioned to help with. Where does federal dollars really go, and can we get a flow of dollars to the technology issues of impaired driving and to influence states? But again, color me a bit pessimistic about getting the Biden administration to forcefully face up to anything where what you hear is they're after pot impaired driving.
Barry, to update you a bit, I was just going to say, Barry, we're now up to 16 departments and agencies that ONDCP oversees, and it's about $35 billion. And, of course, all we're seeing is the rise in overdose deaths. There was the one-time drop a year or so ago, but now, it's right back up there. And so, we have to look at how we're doing this and spending taxpayer dollars efficiently and effectively.
Yep.
I would like to remind everybody that among the drug czars is Michael Botticelli, who went on 60 Minutes to talk about how a DUI arrest for him turned his life around. That he has been in recovery for nearly 30 years now. And what turned his life around was that arrest. And I think people don't often understand how people get into recovery. It often is in response to a crisis, and then what they do with that to turn their lives around. And he is one of my best friends and a wonderful leader, and it happened because of a DUI arrest. And we don't often think about the fact of how law enforcement is actually very helpful for lots of people in dealing with problems, especially in terms of drug and alcohol problems.
Hear, hear.
Well, let me follow up on something that several of you have talked about then, which is budgetary appropriations money problems. We don't know, I think one of you said, how big a problem this is, because people aren't testing. I know Bob mentioned that, others did too. Is this something that Congress should give the states money to do so that they can test, even if not for every state to do it, at least on a pilot project basis? Pick some different states and jurisdictions and test everybody who's was involved in every driver involved in a fatal accident for a whole range of drugs. Is that something that can be done this year to try to give us the info that we need to know how big a problem this is?
Yes, it can be done this year. And there's a wonderful model also in shock trauma centers to where you got plenty of people there to get half a dozen shock trauma centers around the country, which would give us real-time results about the relationship of what drugs are being used and how they are involved in people who are in shock trauma units who are drivers. That's something that's very accessible. But I think also, Paul, the idea of having state experiments, encouraging states to experiment with DUI changes, like the state of Michigan recently did with oral fluids. I think the states are the laboratories on this, and using federal money to encourage model building that can go forward, I think could make a huge difference and could incentivize the states to do some experimenting that could lead to major changes.
Let me give you another question we got from the audience. If we can't yet distribute roadside testing devices to all of our law enforcement officers, should we train more law enforcement officers to be DREs and even phlebotomists so that they can do something until we have roadside devices that we can use on a very widespread basis?
Well, I think we have devices now that we can use on a widespread basis, but I think the DREs is a wonderful thing. It can't be the answer because you can't deploy enough of them to do this, but that they are good. And I think it's been, it started, the DRE idea came from Los Angeles, and NIDA was involved in that original research that led to the DREs. So the DREs is a great thing, but it can't be the major basis because you just can't deploy enough people and get them to the accidents quickly.
Yeah, I mean, these roadside devices are expensive also. A lot of them, $4,000 or $5,000 a piece. That's really tough for some of these small departments to be able to afford to have enough of them out there. And so, with a breathalyzer these days for alcohol, you can, buy one for personal use, online. You can get one, delivered to your house, the next day with Amazon Prime, so that you can sort of test yourself before going out there. And here, we don't have that ability to test, for other drugs. And so we have to come up with a way to be able to test this efficiently and have a national standard that is recognized by the states.
Remember too, Paul, that actually after someone has been arrested and convicted, usually of DUID, they are required at their own expense, if they've been able to keep their driver's license, to install a breath testing piece of equipment within the vehicle that will not allow them to turn the car on until after they have shown that they're free. I mean, these are the kind of technology things that we should be looking at in the future, especially if somebody's been convicted of DUID.
But that would sound like we could make this into a package. We could have legislation that gives funding to states and localities for the devices, as well as to do the drug testing from a laboratory perspective. Even if we didn't do it nationwide, pick different jurisdictions and do it that are likely to be good ones, and then the results of that might inform what we do the following year in 2022. I mentioned that just, it seems like we need to know more, and until we know more, we won't be able fully to know how best to spend the dollars we have, and this would be a small scale way of doing it. Well, gang, let me say this. We have a ton more of questions, but we have reached the end of 9 innings. I know Gil, you and Jim and Bob and Barry have spent a lot of time preparing for this, and you've spent all this time here today. I can't thank you enough on behalf of Heritage and myself. I appreciate all the time you spent today and before. I appreciate the wisdom that you have imparted to us, and I'm hoping that the people take this to heart, because this is a major problem we need to address, and we can do it because it can be done on a bipartisan basis. With that, let me thank you very much and tell you that I always remain open to all of you to help for any ideas. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.